Welcome, I'm Glen Anderson, producer and host of this TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives. This series explores a wide variety of issues related to peace, social and economic justice, the environment, and nonviolent social change. We especially provide opportunities for the public to hear voices and viewpoints that are rarely heard in mainstream media. Mainstream media, politicians, and culture see the world in conventional ways. The establishment is stuck in how they see the world. In order to solve problems, we need to see things differently. This TV series, Glen's Parallax Perspectives, can help us see things differently so we can solve problems at all levels, from the local to the global. This series is called Glen's Parallax Perspectives. Here's what the word parallax means. Put one finger in front of your nose and another finger farther away. Close one eye, then open that eye and close the other. Your fingers will seem to move. This is called a parallax view. This TV series invites you to look at issues from fresh perspectives. Also, see much information about the issues that we cover in this TV series and previous episodes of this series at my blog, www.parallaxperspectives.org. And now I invite you to watch this month's program. This month's interview on Glen's Parallax Perspectives examines the recent bipartisan bill to increase the national debt ceiling. I'll provide fresh information and fresh insights that counter what the politicians and mainstream media have been saying. I'll explain the debt ceiling as a phony baloney scam that Republicans have been abusing for many years. I'll explain why President Biden should not have caved into the House Republicans' bullying. I'll explain the very bad parts of this bipartisan bill. I'll explain what Biden and the Democrats should have done instead, and I'll explain remedies that would have been better than what Biden and Congress did. A few points are so important that I'll repeat them a few times during this hour so they will really sink in and we'll get the message. If we understand these main points, we can solve the problem permanently and not get jerked around over and over again by the Republicans. The federal government's recent debt ceiling deal exposes the differences between typical politicking and better ethics that would produce better public policies. The debt ceiling is also called the debt limit, and those terms are just pretty interchangeable. On June 3rd, 2023, President Biden signed a bipartisan deal suspending the debt ceiling until January 1 of 2025. The dominant forces in both political parties and mainstream media have accepted the recent debt ceiling deal as a sensible political compromise, but it is not. It was based on false assumptions, faulty values, and timid politicking. All these led to a deal that fails to protect the broad public interest and hurts our nation in a number of ways. For a number of months now, the media have been obsessed with the debt ceiling. Mainstream media have been grossly distorting the realities by buying into the Republican propaganda and not telling the truth about the debt. The debt ceiling is not in the Constitution. It's just an old law, a law that has been changed many times. I'll show you an image here. In 1917, Congress passed the Liberty Bond Act of 1917 in order to borrow money so it could issue Liberty bonds to pay for World War I. The federal government's debt never was used as a political weapon until Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House from 1995 to 1999, and he used this old, irrelevant debt ceiling as an illegitimate way to force President Clinton to cut the budget, and Clinton caved in on that. Since then, the debt ceiling has been a Republican scam to bully Congress and Democratic presidents into cutting programs that help the American people. In 2011, the Republican House nearly caused the U.S. to default on its debt before President Obama caved in to the House Republicans and allowed caps on future spending. So Obama screwed us by caving in to Republicans. For many decades, Congress has placed a cap on the total debt the federal government can take on. This is known as the debt ceiling or debt limit. Since the very old law was passed, Congress has altered that limit many, many times in order to ensure the United States does not fail to pay its debts. The debt ceiling is an artificial limit on how much the Treasury can borrow to pay existing obligations to which Congress has already committed. It has nothing to do with future spending, which is hammered out in Congressional's budget negotiations. But President Biden caved in to the House Republicans, as President Clinton and President Obama had done, and agreed to cut future spending contrary to the purpose of the debt ceiling law. But so Biden and Obama and Clinton all caved in to Republican extremists. Actually, the Republicans have been lying to us. Raising the debt ceiling is not about spending any new money. It is about paying our bills for what Congress has already appropriated and our government has agreed to spend. Republicans claim to be fiscally responsible, but actually refusing to pay our bills is fiscally irresponsible. It's like if you go into a restaurant and eat a big meal and then walk out without paying the bill. That's what Republicans keep trying to do to us. Republicans are really committing fiscal malpractice, and they are lying to the public. During the Trump regime, the debt increased $7.8 trillion. This came partly because Trump and Congress slashed taxes on rich people and big businesses. So they shrank the revenue stream and escalated the budget deficit and the federal debt. But you never hear Republicans criticize Trump and Congress for that reckless act of tax cutting and fiscal malpractice. I'll show you an image here. The billionaires are making out like bandits under Republicans for a number of decades now, and the Democrats allow them to do that. The Trump tax cuts on businesses were a permanent 14% tax cut. Most individuals got 0 to 5% reduction that expires in 5 years, but corporations got a tax cut of 14% that goes on forever. So just so you know who's causing the deficit problem, it's not the Democrats, it's the Republicans. Here's some more background on the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is an artifact of fiscal policy from World War I. It was revised before World War II. After Congress has already decided to spend money, it makes no sense for Congress to take a redundant action to have to make it authorize the debt to cover the spending that is already agreed upon. It is stupid, it is out of date, just like the Electoral College is. And it gives Republicans a big advantage, and the Democrats don't stop that. In 1979, the Gephardt rule allowed Congress to authorize spending and raise the debt limit in a single vote. But Congress repealed that sensible plan in 2011. They made the debt ceiling into a weapon. When Republicans control one house of Congress, typically the House, is what they're doing now, they can refuse to raise the debt ceiling, hold the government hostage, and bully the Democrats into making stupid budget cuts. That is what congressional Republicans have been doing for a number of years, and now Democrat Joe Biden allowed himself to be bullied into falling into their trap. In 2011, Republicans nearly prevented the government from paying its bills for things that Congress had already decided to spend. This standoff led the financial rating house Standard & Poor's to downgrade the United States credit rating. In December 2012, the Treasury Department had to take extraordinary measures as it again approached the debt ceiling. And just recently, in early 2023, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen needed to use so-called extraordinary measures, unquote, to keep the government open for a few more months, but they were not extraordinary at all. The Treasury has had to deploy them at least 7 times since 2011. The Republicans put us in a permanent crisis, and they keep bullying us over and over and over again. Biden should not have negotiated with those Republican bullies. Republican House Leader McCarthy and President Biden both declared victory when their debt ceiling deal was approved with relative ease on a congressional vote of 314 to 117 in the House. It saw 165 Democrats and 149 Republicans vote yes. It was similar in the Senate, where the vote for the deal was 63 to 36. Again, like a 2-to-1 majority. 31 Republicans voted no. The 4 Democrat no votes came from John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Ed Markey and Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, and Jeff Merkley of Oregon. And they were joined by Bernie Sanders, an independent, who also voted no. Instead of playing this totally unnecessary game, the reckless and silly game of politicking, we should repeal the debt ceiling law altogether. I'm going to bring something else up here on the screen. Shortly before President Biden caved into the House Republicans, the House had already passed a debt limit bill to impose $4.5 trillion in cuts for upcoming years ahead. And that Republican bill will make children poorer, make veterans sicker by cutting veterans' health care, make families hungrier by cutting food for hungry families, and make housing more expensive. The Republicans' cruel bill that, again, before Biden came in, the Republicans' cruel debt limit bill also would repeal some of the measures that were useful in tackling the climate crisis, repeal the IRS's ability to hold accountable rich people and who cheat on taxes, repeal a way to cancel student debt, and eliminate 2.6 million American jobs and possibly cause a recession. So the Republicans have already done that, and then Biden caved in and made some of those ongoing. The government needs to act responsibly and pay its bills, actually pay for things that Congress has already decided to buy. That involves borrowing money by issuing government bonds. That's a routine practice that goes back hundreds of years, but Republicans refuse to act responsibly unless they can force Democrats to cut critical programs like Social Security, Medicare, health programs, education, environmental care, and so forth, other important programs that really help people. Republicans never call for cutting the Pentagon budget. The debt ceiling was created for a certain limited purpose more than a century ago, but for many years now, Republicans have been using this as a political gimmick to oppose government spending. The gimmick should be abolished altogether. Democrats could have done this in the lame duck session of Congress after the 2022 November election, when Democrats still had majorities in the House and Senate and Biden in the White House, but Democrats failed to do that. The debt ceiling is only a gimmick that allows Republicans to hold our nation hostage by endangering the U.S.'s credit rating and risking our economy and our national credibility, all in order to cut programs that the American people really need, but Republicans oppose. Republicans really do commit public policy malpractice. And unfortunately, public opinion polls show that many voters mistakenly think Republicans are better at managing fiscal matters. Actually, Republicans have screwed things up badly for many years. Spending is only one side of the ledger. The other side is the revenue stream, taxes. Republicans who are worried about deficits and the public debt never call for raising taxes on rich people, never call for raising taxes on big businesses. They want to victimize vulnerable people, the poor, the sick, and so forth, and they want to victimize people who breathe air that they want that needs to be clean and water that needs to be safe. They cut that stuff. Huge tax cuts for rich people and for businesses under Reagan, George W. Bush, and Trump have seriously hurt the revenue side of the ledger and escalated the deficit and our national debt. Republicans caused a shortage of tax revenue that gave Republicans an excuse to cut spending for things that we really need. Likewise, the rhetoric for a so-called balanced budget is simplistic rhetoric designed to fool the vast majority of voters who do not understand economics. Republicans are lying when they compare it to a family's budget. Families do need to balance their budgets, right? Somehow or another. But governments that issue their own currency can print more money and use deficit spending, just like when the U.S. spent a lot of money to get us out of the Great Depression in the 1930s, and just like when the United States spends money on wars. When the United States has the opportunity to start a war, you never hear Republicans say, golly, how are we going to spend for this war? No, they just go ahead and make the war and just add the money to the deficit. They don't care about the deficit then. And even Richard Nixon said, we are all Keynesians now. This is referring to the Keynesian economics that allows for deficit spending to help us through economic hard times. Republicans fool people into thinking that they know how to manage the economy. But Reagan, George W. Bush, and Trump cut taxes, escalated the deficit, and committed malpractice regarding the economy, along with everything else. I'm going to show another image on the screen here. Republicans do not even want government to function. Decades ago, Grover Norquist, he was obsessed with cutting taxes in order to shrink government. And he famously said, our goal is to shrink government to the size where we can drown it in a bathtub. That's what Republicans have been doing for a number of years. Republicans repeatedly hold government hostage in order to cut spending for things that help ordinary people. Republicans have even shut the government down. Republicans have no serious problems to solve our nation's problems. They want to distract us by focusing on non-issues, such as promoting fear of dark-skinned people, fear of Muslims, fear of LGBTQ persons, and other so-called enemies. Republicans do not have any positive, practical solutions, so they simply promote fear, hatred, and cruelty. For the last half century, Democratic administrations have been more fiscally responsible than the Republican ones. Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush racked up record-breaking deficits. Bill Clinton balanced the federal budget. Then George W. Bush's runaway spending for wars and his tax cuts escalated the deficit again. So Obama had to clean that up. Then Trump cut taxes for the elites and added a whopping $7 trillion to the national debt. Let's see, I need to move on to something else here just a moment. Mainstream media falsely say that both sides do it. Actually, only the Republicans do this. And they use this scam only when a Democrat is in the White House. When Trump occupied the White House, Republicans voted to increase the debt limit 3 times under Trump with no incident at all. Over the past quarter century, it's been raised over a dozen times. Republicans are doing this now only because a Democrat is president. Congress voted to extend the debt limit 3 times during the Trump era with no conditions or negotiations. It has been passed 78 times since 1960 in both Republican and Democratic administrations. This act of holding the full faith and credit of the U.S. hostage is a new Republican gimmick from the last number of years. It threatens to seriously hurt our national economy. It is not a bargaining tactic. It is a terrorist tactic. The debt limit is not about spending priorities. It's about making sure the Treasury has the funds to pay our nation's existing obligations and prevent a default and a financial catastrophe. Raising the debt limit is not the time or place to negotiate over the budget. The budget process is a whole different thing that needs to be worked out in Congress. Failing to raise the debt limit would cause the federal government to default on its debt. The default would cause extremely serious damage to the U.S. economy and also a global economic catastrophe. Republicans claim to be patriotic Americans, but they would destroy international confidence in the U.S. dollar, and the Republicans would hurt the dollar's significance as a global currency. Worldwide, people and institutions would choose other foreign currencies instead of the US dollar to rely on. This is how extremely reckless and unpatriotic the Republicans really are. Republicans have held the US hostage before, and Democrats have caved in a number of times. So Republicans know that their reckless bullying can succeed because Democrats always cave in. Congressional Republicans have successfully used the threat of default as leverage to compel cuts to critical programs. In 2011, for example, former House Speaker John Boehner insisted that federal spending be cut by $1 for every dollar increase in the debt limit. His bullying caused Democratic President Obama and congressional Democrats to cave in and agree to the Budget Control Act of 2011, which raised the debt limit and capped federal spending for the next decade. The debt ceiling is only a gimmick to allow Republicans to hold our nation hostage and cut necessary spending by endangering the U.S.'s credit rating and risk our economy and our national credibility in the world of finance. Democrats, including Biden, should not negotiate with those bullies. When someone caves into a bully, they show the bully that bullying wins and will continue to bully the victim. We should repeal the law that allows this debt ceiling gimmick that the Republicans keep using over and over again. On June 3rd, 2023, President Joe Biden signed a debt ceiling bill into law that averts a catastrophic default by the U.S. through January 1, 2025, almost 2 years away. While Biden and mainstream Democrats and mainstream news media hail this as a big bipartisan win for the country, people who paid close attention and who have better ethics recognize this as terribly flawed. The debt limit deal that Biden negotiated with Republican Speaker Kevin McCarthy and signed on June 3rd did prevent the default. But instead of claiming that as a victory, we should make sure everybody understands, one, we should not have gotten into that deal-making situation to begin with, and two, the bipartisan deal is bad in several ways. Debt limit deals are a way to force policy change through the back door by holding the U.S. Economy and global economy hostage. They pervert the congressional budgeting process and should not be accepted as the new normal, as Democrats have allowed it to be. The Nation magazine's Katrina vanden Heuvel wrote a smart article about the deal titled, "Once More, the Washington Debt Ceiling Ritual Ends in a Lousy Deal." And her article's subtitle is, "Where What Cuts There Are Come in All the Wrong Places." And her article makes these points, which I'll enumerate for us. One is accepting that debt limit deals are just business as usual every time we approach the ceiling basically means that one political party can gain access to an inordinately powerful hack around the normal democratic process so long as some arbitrary conditions prevail. Once more, the bizarre Washington debt ceiling ritual ends in a bad deal. The mainstream media and establishment pundits hail it as the revival of the vital center, as if somehow being middle of the road is where the good energy is. Her article says the cuts come in all the wrong places. The U.S. is failing to fund solutions to huge problems, including catastrophic climate change, pandemics, and a debilitated public health system, debilitating inequality and corruption, declining life expectancy in the U.S., and a broken healthcare system. The deal makes some of those big problems even worse. Meanwhile, our bloated military budget will continue to rise. Our military's budget is higher than those of the next 9 nations combined. It is the biggest source of waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. The U.S. has more military bases than embassies in other countries. At a time of obscene economic inequality, the deal refuses to reverse the perverse tax cuts handed out to the rich and corporations in the past decades. Instead, funding for the Internal Revenue Service is cut so it cannot make the tax scofflaws pay the taxes they owe. The U.S. continues to badly starve investments in everything from basic infrastructure, clean water, education, a basic safety net, and domestic research and development and also diplomacy and efficient governance. Democrats in the White House and Democrats have the White House and a Senate majority. Republicans have only a slim majority in the House. Sensible politics would require those people to discuss and debate, but the House Republicans have become so extreme that they refuse to practice honest representative government, so they simply just bullied their way into achieving some goals, and Biden caved into them. They grabbed power and they dictated policy. This is not a sensible way to govern, but Republicans no longer want to govern sensibly. They just want to grab power and demand cruel outcomes. Biden caved into the Republicans by capping domestic spending below the current rate of inflation. Biden caved in by cutting crucial social programs that poor people and vulnerable people need. He caved into the Republicans by burdening some food stamp recipients, people in late middle age, with cruel, cumbersome, and bureaucratic new work requirements. Poor people, including poor children, are going to be hungrier because of what the Republicans and Biden did. I'll read to you what the message says. Biden's cave-in also allows huge, profitable business corporations and extremely rich people to continue cheating on their taxes by preventing the IRS the funding they need to go after those rich people and big businesses that cheat on taxes. Biden's cave-in allows for bigger increases to the military budget. Biden allows Republicans to roll back the National Environmental Policy Act and hurt our environment. And they also fast-track the approval and construction of the fracked gas Mountain Valley pipeline that will run more than 300 miles through West Virginia and Virginia and will hurt the environment and climate. This is from the guy who campaigned for the presidency by promising to protect the climate, and he caved in the Republicans with this horrible pipeline deal that will actually hurt the environment and the climate. California Congressmember Ro Khanna called that pipeline concession, quote, a punch in the gut to climate activists, unquote. And he says it came on the backs of the poor, of students, of the most vulnerable, and women. Lobbyists and politicians prevented the debt bill from including tax reforms and repealing the high-income tax credits. Capitalist businesses that had issued student loans were big winners because the Biden and the Republicans prevented efforts to give relief to borrowers for student loans. Investigative journalist David Sirota told Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, quote, the fossil fuel industry is a big winner here, unquote. He denounced the Mountain Valley Pipeline as, quote, a climate bomb during a climate emergency, unquote. He said the military contractors are also big winners in this deal because it allows the Pentagon budget to escalate to ever higher record levels, even while we cut sensible programs. Huge cuts for the tax cuts for the extremely rich people and big businesses were enacted during Republican administrations from Reagan through Trump. Those income tax cuts are largely responsible for the deficit, which ballooned under Reagan and Trump. Many Americans wanted to repeal those tax cuts, but this bipartisan deal with Biden and the Republicans leaves those huge tax cuts in place for the elites, even while cutting spending and hurting ordinary people. Also, as I said, this debt deal cuts funding for the IRS so they cannot enforce tax laws that are already on the books as they relate to extremely rich people. Hundreds of billions of dollars of owed taxes go unpaid by the richest Americans, and that reduces revenue, it increases the deficit, but this debt deal refuses to solve that problem. The McCarthy-Biden debt deal is a giant windfall for extremely rich people and big businesses, including the ones that break tax laws. The McCarthy-Biden deal is not about reducing the deficit. It increases military spending. The McCarthy-Biden deal would tap, they rejected proposals to tax rich people and businesses. They restricted the IRS from auditing those people. And so this deal allows lawbreaking and prevents the government from collecting the revenue that it lawfully is entitled to in order to pay bills and reduce the deficit. So they're not really about reducing the deficit. If they were, they would not have done what they did. Actually, the McCarthy-Biden deal is cruel also in several ways. As I mentioned, it interferes with many older adults aged 49 to 54 who need food stamps. It forces them to meet new burdensome requirements to report on work activities, searching for work. The problem is worse because of the fact that workers over 50 already face difficult working conditions and a tougher labor market than younger workers have. 5 senators voted against the deal, a few progressives and 1 right-wing Republican. The Democrats denounced Republicans for a manufactured crisis, and they also criticized Biden for negotiating a bad deal that warps budget priorities to favor the military-industrial complex and corporate elites while doing harm to people and the planet. But that was only a few Democrats that said that. Bernie Sanders, an independent, said, quote, deficit reduction cannot just be about cutting programs that working families, the children, the sick, the elderly, and the poor depend upon. It must be about demanding that the billionaire class and profitable corporations pay their fair share of taxes, reining in out-of-control military spending, reducing the price of prescription drugs, and ending billions of dollars in corporate welfare that goes to the fossil fuel industry and other corporate interests, unquote. Representative Mark Polkan from Wisconsin voted no and said, quote, severely restraining domestic spending while continuing to inflate unchecked defense spending for the Pentagon shows Republicans are not actually serious about addressing the deficit, unquote. And David Sirota, the investigative journalist, said Democratic leaders should have raised the debt ceiling after the 2022 midterm elections when the party still had control of Congress. He said, quote, what you see is a picture of a party that wanted this outcome. Let me check something here quickly and I'll be right back with you, okay? Instead of negotiating with bullies, Biden should have done this. The real solution would be to totally abolish the debt ceiling, repeal the law that keeps allowing Republicans to create this crisis. But even without this, the practical goal, a limited goal, would have at least had a clean debt increase, simply increase the limit without making all these other changes. Biden should never have caved in to McCarthy. Biden's negotiation proved to Republican bullies that they can keep bullying Democrats and yank the government around to achieve their cruel goals. We need to repeal the debt limit law altogether. As long as Democrats allow it to exist, Republicans will keep using it, jerking us around and making cuts that hurt us. When Biden signed the debt ceiling deal, he praised it as a big win for the country. Actually, David Sirota, the investigative journalist, said, quote, the working class of this country was deeply harmed by this bill, unquote. Again, we need to understand that he faults the Democrats for not having eliminated that when they had the majority after the midterm 2022 elections. The American people need to understand we did not have to suffer this crisis. The Democratic Party could have done that after the November 22 midterms. The Democratic Party chose not to solve the problem. And David Sirota told Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, quote, Joe Biden throughout his career has given 4 speeches on the floor of the Senate, has made clear that he wants to work with Republicans to cut spending, cut funding for social problems. So I think we have to step back and realize this is a moment of honesty, a moment of clarity of where at least the leadership of the Democratic Party is where it comes to things like budget austerity, unquote. If the Democratic Party really cared about ordinary people, especially poor people, they would have chosen other remedies. And there are remedies that exist. I don't have time to say much here, but I'll post some information about that on my blog. There's an article from February 15 of this year that explained how Republicans were actually making the deficit worse. There's an article titled, quote, White House, the GOP's current agenda would add $3 trillion to national debt. And it had this subtitle, quote, the administration says the GOP doesn't actually care about the national debt, but rather wants to slash welfare, unquote. So I want to show something on the screen here. The American people do not want that. The American people really want peace, not more war. Instead of cutting vital programs, and adding more billions of dollars to the bloated military budget, we should have done the opposite. We need to slash Pentagon spending. We need to fully fund programs that help people. And I like Jesse Graber's illustration that I show here on the screen. They should not have promised future cuts. The only problem is a very short-term postponement of this ridiculous self-made threat to blow up the economy, and the Republicans will keep bringing that back over and over again. The deal just makes things worse. McCarthy's deal is actually helping him raise money from extremely rich people who benefit from the deal that he extracted from Biden. McCarthy immediately started using his victory for the rich against the poor as a highly successful fundraising strategy. He immediately started raising millions of dollars of donations from rich people and big business corporations that are profiting from his deal. And Democrats were wrong to have caved in. And let's see. I can skip over some stuff, but this will all appear on my blog. Republicans keep playing long-term strategies, and the current right-wing mania in the Republican Party and the Supreme Court, and the attacks on women's rights, gay rights, racial minorities, all this started decades ago, and it's been escalating step by step as the Republicans have been pushing a more extremist and cruel right-wing long-term game. And now we face a problem here of emerging fascism in our country. Democrats and progressives need to organize long-term strategies that are bold and savvy enough to overcome the current dangers and create a better political culture in the U.S. Months ago, Biden was saying he would stand strong for a clean increase in the debt ceiling with no other conditions, but then he caved in. What he should have done is he should have gone public. Biden should have gone very public, used the presidential bully pulpit to tell the American people on nationwide TV exactly what the Republicans are doing. He should have spoken clearly, powerfully, and decisively. He should have said the debt ceiling is a scam. It's not rooted in the Constitution. It's just a silly law that is 100 years out of date. It has been routinely raised so the nation can just simply pay its bills. Republicans exploit it when Democrats are in the White House, but never when Republicans are in the White House. And Republicans use it to bully for cutting things that the American people need. He should have told the public what the Republicans are on record for wanting to cut. And many Republicans are on record saying they want to cut Social Security, they want to cut Medicare, they want to cut food for hungry people, they want to cut health care for ordinary Americans, they want to cut environmental protections, and on and on and on. Biden should have encouraged people to demand their members of Congress to stop holding our nation hostage. And if Biden had mobilized ordinary people to push hard on their Republican members of Congress to say, hell no, you got to stop this crap, stop ripping us off, and stop holding our nation hostage, they could have applied enough pressure on Republicans to force them to back down and allow for a clean increase in the debt ceiling, or better yet, repeal the law altogether. The debt ceiling deal cut some good programs that we really need, but it failed to cut some bad things that should have been cut long ago. Biden agreed with the Republicans to continue huge subsidies for fossil fuels. They should have been cutting that long ago. Taxpayers are funding oil and coal companies. Congress should have cut the cruelty that the government conducts on immigrants. We should take the funding away from those cruel anti-immigrant cruelty behaviors. Congress especially should have cut the gigantic military-industrial complex, but there's never a debt ceiling for the military-industrial complex. They keep growing. And the Nation magazine published an article on May 31 of 2023, posted by John Nichols. It contrasted the good things that are on the table for cutting versus the bad things that are never put on the table for cutting. And I copied some information and posted that to my blog. But the cutting food for hungry people, sure, that's on the table for cutting. Balancing budgets on the backs of the poor, sure, that's on the table for cutting. Environmental protection, sure, we can cut that. But they never cut military-industrial complex funding. They never cut tax breaks for rich people and so forth. And the Biden-McCarthy bill actually increases military spending to $886 billion, which accounts to a 3% rise this year, and everything else gets trimmed. This funding for the Pentagon is excessive, it's abusive, it's fraudulent. There's a huge amount of fraud and waste there. Ralph Nader denounced the deal because it allows Republicans to cut, quote, necessary domestic programs like education, health, environment, and worker safety, unquote. And a couple of progressive Democrats in Congress have denounced all this stuff also. We could have funded better education, better funding for teachers and stuff. Nope, can't do that. So 70 years ago, in 1953, President Eisenhower, who was a Republican at a time before Republicans got extremely stupid, Eisenhower warned that excessive military spending was bad for the U.S. because, quote, it is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children, unquote. And he said, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed, unquote. And 8 years later, in January 61, when Eisenhower was leaving his presidential term, he warned against the dangers of the rapidly growing and unconstrained military-industrial complex. But Biden and McCarthy are escalating the military-industrial complex's abuses, and they're cutting programs that we really need. A remedy already is in the Constitution, but they refuse to go there either. Mainstream news media keep giving credibility to the Republican propaganda about the debt ceiling, but we need to wise up and start reporting the truth. The debt ceiling is not a legitimate way to change the federal budget. It really is about whether we will pay for the bills that Congress has already appropriated lawfully and spent. Republicans want the U.S. to stiff the people who hold bonds, and we can avoid this cycle of the debt ceiling crisis by repealing the law about the debt limit. That's an easy thing to do, and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen already supports that, and congressional legislation has been introduced for that. This debt ceiling scam that Republicans keep using is actually unconstitutional, but nobody will call them on that. So I'll show you here what the wording says. In the 14th Amendment, there's wording that says the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. Republicans keep violating the Constitution by refusing to pay our debt, and Democrats, Clinton, Obama, and now Biden, have caved into the Republicans and violated the Constitution by violating the 14th Amendment. I mean, this is just an outrage. Congress should have just passed a clean increase, like a lot of people were urging them to do, or better yet, just repeal the stupid law altogether, but they keep caving in. President Clinton and Obama caved in 1995, 2011, 2013, and now Biden has caved in 2023. In 1974, Congress passed the Congressional Budget and Empowerment Control Act of 1974, and that also is a remedy. But the Democrats won't look at the remedies. They somehow like to go along with the government, with the Republicans, in hurting the government, cutting things that people need, and expanding the military-industrial complex, and favoring rich people and big businesses. Let me see what else we have here. I want to check something quickly, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, good. This phony baloney stuff that they're doing in politics makes the American people ignorant and cynical, and their balanced budget obsession is silly and wrong. And I've got information about this to my blog that we don't have time to say during the program, but the balanced budget thing is not necessary. As I said earlier, in the Great Depression, we used deficit spending to get us out of the Great Depression, and they use deficit spending anytime they want to have a war or whatever. Let's see. Skipping through some things here to cover the time, get done on time. An article by a historian said that in April 1933, Franklin Roosevelt abrogated the gold clause in the debt contracts and banned almost all private ownership of gold. He later devalued the dollar. That was a default, but it survived the Supreme Court and it worked. Debts lost value. Working people regained confidence. The economy grew for the next 4 years, and going off the gold standard was a key early step in the New Deal. Republicans do not care about the deficit, as I said. And shortly after the debt ceiling fight, Republicans proposed making the deficit even worse by proposing even more tax cuts for extremely rich people and big businesses. And I'll have some article links about that on my blog too. Public Citizen, the bold progressive organization that Ralph Nader created half a century ago, www.citizen.org, provided some new information on June 12 of 2023. I'll quote here a bit. One thing the GOP got for ransoming the full faith and credit of the United States is a 2-year freeze on almost all government spending at current levels, and not even for the rate of inflation. Pentagon gets more money though, and they said some members of Congress wanted even more than the additional 28 billion for the Pentagon. So this is a horrible deal. They say with the ink yet not dried on the document, some jingoistic members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, are already trying to renege on the deal and force through a scheme to funnel still more taxpayer money to the Pentagon. And they say, oh, we got to be afraid of Russia. Oh, we got to be afraid of China. But the Public Citizen communication said, we already spend more on our military than the next 9 nations combined. We spend a lot more than Russia, a lot more than China, and those are in the next group of nations, but we spend more than all those combined on the military. The Pentagon, well, the US spends about 10 times as much as what Russia does. And the Pentagon itself identified more than $100 billion in waste, but they won't cut that. The Pentagon keeps failing to pass an audit, which is required by the government laws, but they keep failing the audit and they keep getting more money, even though they can't account for the money that they've already spent. The Pentagon could account for only 39% of its $3.5 trillion in assets. So they got money, they got stuff, and they can't account for it. Public Citizen's message added this, quote, these reactionary members of Congress, many of whom have recently done a lot of whining about out-of-control government spending, are trying to renege on the debt ceiling deal they just made and give still more money to an overfunded, wasteful, can't pass an audit Pentagon rather than to address the pressing needs of everyday Americans, unquote. And then on June 16, 2023, about 2 weeks after Biden signed the deal, more news broke that the House Republicans are breaking their deal and threatening more government shutdown. And I've got information there posted to my blog. There's a lot of information that exists. I'm posting some of it to the blog, more than I have time to say here on this TV program. But mainstream media are not a source of valid information and insights. They keep saying what the politicians want you to know, and they keep failing to say things that we really ought to know instead of the baloney that's coming out of the politicians in DC. To prepare for this TV program, I read dozens of articles about the issues. I learned a lot, so I'm sharing this with you. I invite you to look at alternative progressive sources of news and analysis, including articles and other resources about economics from progressive perspectives and left perspectives. On my blog, there's an economics category that includes some issues information I posted about modern monetary theory, which is a bold approach stronger than Keynesianism. It adds to this article about debt ceiling by proposing a bold way to justify even more vigorous federal spending for really good purposes. When I post this TV video to my blog, I'll also post a transcript of what I'm saying now and some links to additional information that I don't have time to say right now. The transcript We'll include links to a number of articles and other resources. Visit parallaxperspectives.org, click the TV programs link, and look for the July 2023 TV program titled, What's Wrong with the Debt Ceiling Deal? It's all there. Both political parties keep failing to serve the broad public interest. I invite you also to learn more about the problem, the political problem and solutions, by visiting my blog to watch my June 2023 TV program and or read the thorough summary of what my knowledgeable guest said. Visit parallaxperspectives.org, click TV programs, look for the June 2023 TV program titled Using Lotteries to Create an Open Democracy. So I thank the people who've been watching the program. Over and over again, we keep seeing politicians, the two big political parties, making decisions that are not in our best interest. Also, over and over again, mainstream news media reinforce what the politicians think and what the politicians do, regardless of the facts and regardless of what people really want and need. And this is true on issue after issue, not only economics, but also foreign policy, social justice, and other issues. Ordinary people need to inform ourselves and organize grassroots movements to change the conventional thinking so we can change a great many public policies. We also need to replace nearly all of the incumbents and elect people with better values, better smarts, and the courage to make bold, ethical decisions. And you can get information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence through my blog, parallaxperspectives.org. You can phone me at 360-491-9093. We are all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs exactly what you have to offer. Thank you.